Distinguished guests, there are distinguished people among us here, ICD staff, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Kindly allow me to begin by saying how I feel greatly humbled to be accorded the opportunity to make a brief presentation to such a qualified audience and in this prestigious setting. The content of my presentation constitutes part of the research work I have been conducting for the doctoral thesis in international relations and cultural diplomacy, jointly organized by this honorable institute and the University of Bucharest. So I'm an OB, an old boy of the ICD. The title of my doctoral thesis is A Comprehensive Analysis of the Issues and Perspectives Pertaining to the Forging of a Regional Strategy in Integrated Water Management by the riparian countries of the River Nile Basin. So what I will say will be in line also with what my colleague El Rashid was saying. This paper is being presented with this title, Assessing the Role of Cultural Diplomacy in Consolidating and Institutionalizing a Regional Model of Integrated Water Resource Management, the Case of the Nile Water Agreements, and the Controversy over State Succession International Treaties. We just heard a few words from Her Excellency about this when she talked about the Renaissance Dam. So I've organized my work. I will start with a brief outline of the status questionis, and I've chosen 3 points from the title. The guiding theme is integrated water resource management. The context is constituted by the riparian countries of the Nile River Basin, and the focus is the role of cultural diplomacy in promoting sustainable development and peace. I will skip the literature review that I did, but some aspects are important. They will come back. It's about watershed management approaches, policies, and operations. Just to cite one. Nile water agreements, imposition and impacts of a transboundary legal system. That's another. And on the third point, I will go back to the soft power concept, so dear to Joseph Nye. The first part, as I said, takes us to the guiding theme, the integrated water resources management model. What is this paradigm, the IWRM paradigm? And this is how it is defined by the Global Water Partnership. A process which promotes the coordinated development and management of water, land, and related resources in order to maximize economic and social welfare in an equitable manner without compromising the sustainability of vital ecosystems and the environment. In this term, the IWRM helps to protect the world's environment, foster economic growth and sustainable agricultural development, promote democratic participation in governance, and improve human health. Linking this paradigm to the context we're dealing with, that is the Nile River riparian countries, I would like to start by first presenting this context. So considered on a unitary basis, the Nile River is a highly heterogeneous geographical aggregation. In its latitudinal extension, the area it covers stretches northwards from the southern hemisphere and across both the equator and the Tropic of Cancer to the Mediterranean Sea. Longitudinally, it spans from the mountains of Darfur to the Ethiopian highlands in its more wider northern sector, and from the western to the eastern arm of the Rift Valley in the narrower southern sector. It is needless to highlight that the combination of such significant variations in latitude, longitude, and altitude inevitably give rise to a mosaic of almost distinct climatic zones that have since time immemorial been directly linked to the presence of human beings and their activities in this area. As a matter of fact, this is the unique region in which, to this date, the very origins of the human race can be traced. Her Excellency talked to us about Lucy. It is the region in which mankind invented society, the region which by far influenced the expansion of the human race around the planet and had a great role in the long series of internal and unfortunately inadequately investigated and considered migration waves that characterized the population of the African continent in more recent periods. And ultimately, the region that gave birth to one of the greatest river civilizations ever, that is to say, Egypt. Apart from the influences in transforming its peculiar riparian zone into the cradle of mankind and of human civilization, it is therefore evident that the River Nile and its enormous tributary system has for centuries impacted significantly on the human and economic geography of the area. The marked variation in the physical characteristics of the area is not, however, limited exclusively to the strictly geographical dimension, but even the historical and cultural features follow suit. In fact, the numerous ethnic, religious, and national communities that today inhabit the Nile Basin are the outcome of differing pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial experiences, especially when analyzed in terms of cultural heritage and, accordingly, assessed from the linguistic, religious, socio-economic, and political points of view. For this same reason, the nature of the relations between the 11 countries that presently constitute the area, the 11 countries were supposed to be on a map that we cannot see, but anyway, you know them. I can name them.
Can we open this now?
Yes, yes, okay. Oh, I can.
It should be now.
I don't see any movement here. I can see it there, but not, there we go. Just a moment. Okay, we are lucky. If we are lucky, it will open. All right, I'll just read on. So as I was saying, so for this same reason, the nature of the relations between the 11 countries that presently constitute the area have not always been peaceful, and sometimes degenerated from traditional or conventional coexistence or mutual distrust to tensions and even to armed conflicts. There have been armed conflicts in this region. I come from Uganda, the Great Lakes area, so probably you all know what has been happening there over the years. Hence, the need to find new pathways for the direct and positive engagement of all the key stakeholders of the area in a process of constructive dialogue between these countries. Judging from the scarce results of past initiatives, currently the joint management of the waters of the Nile River and its core-related development challenges probably represent the most practicable starting point for the further elaboration of such hypotheses. Peace can be found if there is common interest, if there is a win-win situation for everybody. What are the main juridical and political challenges at international level? Historical treaties and agreements. This is the first point we have to deal with when we talk about the Nile waters. Today, series of colonial era agreements affect the use of the Nile River. Two commonly cited agreements in terms of water allocation and the purported rights of riparians include a 1921 exchange of notes between His Majesty's government in the United Kingdom and the Egyptian government in regard to the use of the waters of the River Nile. Yeah, that's the map. Yeah? Okay, thank you very much. So for irrigation purposes, and the 1959 agreement between the Republic of Sudan and the United Arab Republic of Egypt for the full utilization of the Nile waters. Following Sudan's independence from the British and Egyptian rule in 1954, in 1956, the country, Sudan, urged for renegotiation of the terms of the 1929 agreement. In this sense, the 1959 agreement governs the control of certain projects concerning the Nile, as well as water allocation between Sudan and Egypt. The allocation of BCM, that is billion cubic meters, was changed in 1959 to 55.5 annually for Egypt and 18.5 for Sudan. Her Excellency told us that Ethiopia was managing about only 8% of the waters there. Obviously, other riparian countries were still not allocated any BCM. Consider that. The 1959 agreement also commits Egypt and Sudan to adopt a united view on the claims of upstream riparian countries. The current status of this agreement is disputed among the Nile riparian countries. As has already been noted, the Nile Basin has witnessed several changes in territorial sovereignty over the years. Just as European occupation and colonization was the most important influence in state formation in the region, decolonization has been the most important cause of state succession. All the 11 basin countries, except Egypt and Ethiopia, were dependencies of various European powers and became independent states in the second half of the 20th century. And aside from decolonization, state succession in the Nile Basin has been prompted by such diverse factors as conquest, annexation, merger, and succession. A few examples to surface. Egypt has been part of the Ottoman Empire under Turkish sovereignty, a protectorate of Great Britain, an independent state, and finally, in 1958, part of the United Arab Republic after uniting with Syria. Ethiopia, a sovereign state, was conquered in Italy by Italy in 1936, a change of sovereignty that was recognized by European powers. It was not conquered fully, so there's no contradiction with what we had before. Ethiopia was a country that was never colonized because they fought, they didn't lay down their arms and said, okay, you can stay, they fought back. And so the Italian occupation was partial. Eritrea was a colony of Italy, became part of Ethiopia, and is now an independent state after a war of succession. Tanganyika, Rwanda, and Burundi were colonized by Germany and then became mandated territories, respectively under Britain and Belgium, before gaining independence to become sovereign states. In 1964, Tanganyika merged with Zanzibar to form Tanzania. Last but not least, South Sudan succeeded from Sudan only a few years ago. All the 11 riparian countries of the Nile are de facto and juridically successor states. The effect of change of sovereignty on treaties is not a manifestation of some general principles or rule of state succession, but rather a matter of treaty law and interpretation. When a new state emerges, it is not bound by the treaties of the predecessor sovereign by virtue of principle of state succession. As a matter of general principle, a new state, ex hypothesi, a non-party cannot be bound to a treaty by a treaty, and in addition, other parties to a treaty are not bound to accept a new party, as it were, by operation of law. The rule of non-transmissibility applies both to secession of newly independent states, that is, in case of decolonization, and other appearances of new states by the union or dissolution of states. To the general rule of non-transmissibility, also known as the clean state or tabula rasa doctrine, there are some exceptions. The clear examples are law-making treaties or treaties evidencing rule of general international law and boundary treaties. A wide variety of juridical literature, including norms and other documentary forms produced on the subject, are made accessible by the International Law Association. Among these, we'll just cite two of them. The Helsinki Rules on the Uses of the Waters of International Rivers of 1966, and the report published by the Berlin Conference on Water Resource Law of 2004. This is commonly referred to as the Berlin Rules of Water Resources. The role of cultural diplomacy in this setting. I'll cite Joseph Nye. It is the traditional view. In the traditional view, states give priority to military security to ensure their survival. Today, however, states must consider new dimensions of security. National security has become more complicated as threats shift from the military, that is, threats against territorial integrity, to the economic and ecological. While military forces remain the ultimate form of power in a self-help system, the use of force has become more costly for modern great powers than it was in earlier centuries. Other instruments such as communications, organizational and institutional skills, and manipulation of interdependence have become important. Contrary to some rhetorical flourishes, Interdependence does not mean harmony. Rather, it often means unevenly balanced mutual dependence, just as the less enamored of two lovers may manipulate the other, the less vulnerable of two states may use subtle threats to their relationship as a source of power. Further, interdependence is often balanced differently in different spheres, such as security, trade, and finance, thus creating and resisting linkages between issues when a state is either less or more vulnerable than another becomes the art of the power game. Political leaders use international institutions to discourage or promote such linkages. They shop for the forum that defines the scope of an issue in the manner best suiting their interests. How much time do I have? In a region characterized by political and socio-economic instability, much of which is either directly or indirectly related to the international and global status quo, Her Excellency told us about the long list, of problems, of challenges, drought, locust invasions, so these are things that go across the boundary of individual states. Outlining and highlighting the different and emergent challenges in the joint management of the Nile's resources would therefore imply coming to terms with the interrelation and interdependence between some key development issues. I've just listed down a few. Number one, understanding the potential overall impact of global climate change on the riparian countries. Number two, urgently identifying new ways to address the old age issue of food security and food sovereignty. We have just had some lovely Ethiopian coffee, and that is part of the rights, and this is what food sovereignty is about. It's about producing my food and eating my food and not depending on imported food. We know what it means, in this war situation that we're facing right now. It's very important. We're saying this because of the kind of investments of the food industry that tend to take away local production to promote importation, and that creates dependency. So starting from the notion of moyen d'existence durable, sustainable livelihoods, especially in rural areas. My colleague Rashid just told us that how part of the migration that arrives in Europe is a result of this. Young people running away, from poor contexts where they don't have any perspective of living a decent life. Getting braced, point three, getting braced to better cope with exponential and conspicuously unsuitable, unsustainable demographic and urban growth rates. This is an indirect problem. The direct problem is gender empowerment. So growth rates are strong, demographic rates are linked to birth rates. Birth rates mean women, and women, especially in rural contexts in Africa. I'm referring to the riparian areas. So I support your what you mentioned before, Dr. Rashid. During the COVID, imagine the lockdown for COVID-19 in an urban slum, where people go out every day. They have to go out to try to sell something to get the food, to pay their rent, to buy water, to buy everything, and you're told you can't go out, you can't go around. Disaster. So that is the disaster, and we're talking about resilience. So it means finding ways, of handling this situation. Finding answers. So finding sustainable solutions to the energy sector. We all have to eat. How do we cook our food? Do you use firewood, charcoal? That means cutting trees and other things and so on. Or do you use solar power? But can you afford that? So both industrial and domestic or at family levels. All right. In spite of these problems, there have been landmark achievements in the field of public and cultural diplomacy concerning the joint management of the Nile's waters. Even though over the last decades, official development assistance, you're talking about budget, Rashid, directed to the region has mainly functioned on the basis of individual country programs. Initiatives of regional cooperation have also flourished. I have an example of 3 or 4 of them. The Intergovernmental Authority on Development in East Africa, the IGAD, was created in 1996 to supersede the Intergovernmental Authority on Drought and Development, which was founded in 1986, so 10 years of difference, to mitigate the effects of the recurring severe droughts and other natural disasters that resulted in widespread famine, ecological degradation, and economic hardship in the region. Through the United Nations, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, Sudan, and Uganda had convened to establish the Intergovernmental Body for Development and Drought Control in their region. Eritrea became the 7th member after attaining independence in 1993. With the new emerging political and socio-economic challenges, the Assembly of Heads of State of Government, meeting in Addis Ababa in 1995, resolved to revitalize the IGADD and expand areas of cooperation among member states. The new and revitalized IGAD was launched during the 5th summit of the Assembly of Heads of State and Government held in November 1996 in Djibouti. The summit endorsed the decision to enhance regional cooperation in 3 priority areas of food security and environmental protection: economic cooperation, regional integration and social development, peace and security. In 2011, South Sudan joined IGAD as the 8th member state. Thus, today, the region stretches to an area of 5.2 million square kilometers. The Organization for the Management and Development of the Kagera River Basin was formally launched in 1977 in Tanzania through an agreement signed between the presidents of Burundi, Rwanda, and Tanzania. Prior to the agreement, a 6-year sectoral specific preliminary study on the potential of the area had been conducted. And this summit actually was based on this survey. The aims of the organization are the achievement of an integrated development of water and land resources of the Kagera Basin, the training of nationals to carry out such development, and the reinforcement of the existing cooperation between participating governments through regional development of the basin's resources. The Kagera Basin, the Kagera is the southernmost tributary of the Nile. It is and its headwaters are in Burundi. So when we see 11 countries, the reason for Burundi being considered as part of the riparian countries of the Nile is owed to this river. The East African Federation, Shirikisho la Afrika Mashariki, is a proposed political union binding the 7 sovereign states of the East African Community in the African Great Lakes region, meaning Burundi, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Kenya, Rwanda, South Sudan, Tanzania, Sudan, and Uganda. They are bound into a single federated sovereign. The idea is to create a single federated sovereign state. This idea existed in the early 1960s. I'm old enough to remember the Pan-Africanist days. So Kwame Nkrumah, Jamal Abdel Nasser, Haile Selassie, Mzee Jomo Kenyatta, and so on. The founder fathers of those who believed that regional integration would have brought benefits to Africa, would have made created more opportunities and a more sustainable system. The idea, in September 2018, a committee was formed to begin the process of drafting a regional constitution, and a draft constitution of the Confederation was set out by 2021 and ready for implementation 2023. We're waiting to see what will happen. While the East African Federation has not yet been established, many steps have been taken to advance this eventual goal. Institutions and governing bodies already exist for the eventual union of these nations, with representatives from all of the related nations working together towards the common goal. Finally, the Nile Basin Initiative is the main organ of international cooperation regarding the integrated management of the River Nile waters. It's the main focus of current efforts in constructive dialogue centered around the Nile Basin Initiative, although other informal forms of cooperation, as we have seen, have existed in the riparian countries. The NBI was launched in February 1999 by the water ministers of the countries that share the river: Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Burundi, Rwanda, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Eritrea, which participates as an observer. There is a small branch of the river Sobat, which is on the borders with South Sudan. The NBS seeks to develop the river in a cooperative manner, share substantial socio-economic benefits, and promote regional peace and security. Provide an institutional mechanism, a shared vision, and a set of agreed policy guidelines to provide a basin-wide framework for cooperative action, not just one country, all countries. A goal of the NBI had been to establish cooperative framework agreement to replace either bilateral treaties signed between countries, to formalize the transformation of the Nile Basin Initiative into a permanent Nile River Basin Commission. In 2010, 7 of the Nile Basin states agreed to open the CFA for signature. Egypt and Sudan rejected this proposition, suggesting instead that all of the riparian countries issue a presidential declaration to launch the River Nile Basin Commission as negotiations on the CFA continue. Despite the difficulty in ironing out these problems, the agreement of the Nile River Basin Cooperative Framework was officially opened for signature in May 2010. Ethiopia, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Uganda chose to sign immediately, but it nevertheless remained open for the signature of the other states. The issue of the launching of the CFA and its geopolitical implications constitute one of the main objects of my research investigation, and will be covered in the conclusive chapters of my thesis. The road ahead. So to the honorable practitioners of cultural diplomacy gathered here, we could agree that sustainable development, which is another of the themes that we're taking care of here, we're not talking only about water, but the integrated the integrated water resources management model talks about development. It's about 3 pillars: enabling environment, institutional roles, management instruments. So you have water for people, water for food, water for nature, water for industry and other uses. With specific reference, so sustainable development and peace, as I was saying, as processes, should be more appropriately attributed the epistemological dimension of verbs, that is of action, rather than nouns, objects, or static situations. Peace is something that we build. Peace is doing things. It's not something that somebody does for us. Nobody can say, peace is here, peace is there. It's not one thing, okay? We are free to define it the way we want. What is important is what we do to create that situation. So this same thing applies to epistemologically to sustainable development. It's something that has to be created. With specific reference to the application of the IWRM in the context of the Nile River riparian countries, this should mean making possible the integration between the conventional instruments of public and cultural diplomacy by using 2 key innovative models of intervention. Number 1, the design principles for community-based natural resources management. This is a model that whoever deals with development knows. It bears the name of Elinor Ostrom. 8 design principles, posited to characterize robust institutions for managing common pool resources, things that belong to everybody, that is the right of everybody, to access, such as land and water, along with them forest, wildlife, fisheries, and so on. How is my timing? Okay. So I'll just read out these principles. Principle 1, well-defined boundaries around a community of users and around the resource system this community uses. 2, the condition that both appropriation and provision rules conform in some way to local conditions, such as its spatial and temporal heterogeneity, and the congruence exists between appropriation and provision. Taking and putting back. Planting trees. We have heard of many trees planted in Ethiopia by their thousands. Okay, it's not about cutting trees. Finland is one of the biggest producers of of paper, but they replant their trees, and they don't have a problem of deforestation. Okay. Collective choice arrangements as a recognition of the importance of local knowledge in natural resource management, in indigenous wisdom. Being aware that the person who lives in a context, in that territory, knows that territory better than I do. So the first thing I would have to do is to listen to that person, develop whatever idea I have with that person. That is more helpful. Monitoring in order to ensure that those who do not comply with rules are made visible to the community. They don't get arrested or shot. Made visible. In communities, reputation is important. With the aim of facilitating the effectiveness of rule enforcement mechanisms and informing strategic and contingent behavior of those who do comply with rules. So appreciating those who follow the rules and sanctioning those who don't follow the rules. The establishment of an efficacious graduated sanctioning system to deter participants from excessive violations of community rules. Graduated sanctions progress incrementally based on either the severity of or the repetition of the violence, and are meant to help to maintain community cohesion while genuinely punishing severe cases. The systems must also maintain proportionality between the severity of violations and sanctions. Principle 6, guaranteeing accessibility to low-cost conflict resolution mechanisms, since conflict over an inexhaustible resource is inevitable in CPR management, necessitating the presence of established mechanisms for conflict resolution to maintain collective action. Principle 7, minimum recognition of rights, intercommunity connections can be brought as horizontal linkages, but also vertical linkages when we talk about multiple jurisdictional levels. Ensuring, so justice has to be brought down to the people. It's not only the top-down system, but also bottom-up. Ensuring that governance, this is the last principle, governance activities are organized in multiple layers of nested enterprises. So it's not an ideological thing. So these principles have been monitored over decades, and in specific environments, contexts, they are working. So this should be also a good starting point for the integrated management of the Nile's rivers. Second point, the last one, African solutions to African problems. This is an old thing. It has been said over and over again. We heard of some good examples of African values from the ambassador. I will add one. The sense of belonging in a village is not measured by the distance between one hut or homestead and another. It's not a distance between the houses, but by a common sentiment of belonging together, be it in good or bad times. We are going to the same place. We will go there together. Well, if things work, we'll be happy. If things don't work, we'll be sad together. That is the point. So this vision of the village is not something geographical. It is emotional. It's a value. Then the anthropological, pedagogical, and ethical, these are 3 points, challenge of finding, believing, and investing in African cultural values and social practices can provide the necessary critique and improve margins of adaptation of the model we talked about before in the Nile River Basin. Communities have always been part of the African traditional landscape, but much still remains to be done to innovate and renovate the societal basis of community functioning, going to understand how the equilibrium, the dynamics of the equilibrium in African society, A participatory and community approach to development, participatory and community approach. Issues would provide an ontological focus on the role played by cultural practices in change, negotiation, and in intra and inter-community dialogue, thus making available a constantly renewable instrument for conflict management and for strengthening the bond between community building and community development. It's not one person, it's the community going together. We talked about gender empowerment. It's not an individual thing. To this effect, my research work will showcase a selected group of contemporary models of traditional community building best practices from Africa that will probably include, I still haven't finished the list. Today I heard of one, so I have to run after Her Excellency and find out how the Ethiopians, in the Ethiopian context. But these are the ones that I have in hand. The Al Jawdiya, I had this from Professor Mohammed, our Professor Mohammed from Kordofan. He gave a lecture on this in one of our meetings at the ICG. I did some search and I found very good papers about this community system of cohesion, of creating togetherness, reconciliation, and so on. So that's from Sudan. There is this matter put from between the Luo, which is practiced by the Luo in the Acholi line in Uganda. Then there's the Medina Pact, which comes from the Libyan experience of the Arab Parties Initiative for Peace, of which I'm a founder. Indaba diplomacy from South Africa. Grassroots or civil cultural diplomacy from the Mozambican experience of the community of St. Gilles. So these are models that I will look into and try to adapt and see. Ultimately, a people-centered paradigm also helps to reinforce a bottom-up approach to democracy. In the Nile Basin area, this particularly contemplates investing in the institutional capacity of non-state actors and civil society organizations, such as formal non-governmental organizations, NGOs, or informal community-based organizations. In this sense, my research work intends to demonstrate how the mediation role played by these social actors could be fundamental in strengthening democratic transition processes in the River Nile riparian countries. The people doing it. Write down. Movements. This ought not to be interpreted neither as a parallel or supposedly advanced conception of democracy, nothing new, but would simply represent a sustainable pathway towards authentically African models and definitions of democracy as governments of the people, by the people, and for the people. Thank you very much. I'll stop here.